University of Illinois College of Law. He said today the U.S. strike clearly violates the War Powers Resolution, the War Powers Clause of the United States Constitution, and the United Nations Charter. It's impeachable. Quote, these so-called deconfliction zones are de facto partitions of Syria in violation of its territorial sovereignty and political independence. The Hill report states President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor says in a new interview that the threat of impeachment was, quote, a factor, end quote, in Obama's decision not to pursue a tougher intervention policy in Syria. We actually had Congress warning us against taking action without congressional authorization, which we interpreted as the president can face impeachment, Ben Rhodes told Politico magazine. When asked to elaborate, the president's advisor said that Republicans, including then-Speaker John Boehner, made it clear that premature military action without congressional approval would be unconstitutional, end quote.
Thank you, Mary. This is John Sakowicz introducing the show here Monday, June the 12th, 2017, broadcasting live from our studios here in the Mendocino Environmental Center in Ukiah, California. I want to give a quick thank you to our IT team, Sid Cooperrider and Govinda Dalton, for tearing down the studio and rebuilding it from the carpet up. So thanks to our IT team. Thank you for all our schedulers and production team. Thank you to our summer intern, Elliot Hershkowitz, Hal, for preparing the outline for the show and suggesting some questions. Also want to give a shout out to the Warriors. Go Warriors. They could beat the Cleveland Cavaliers tonight. Just having some breaking news right now. Maryland Attorney General Brian Fosh and the AG for the District of Columbia filed suit a few hours ago against Donald Trump for it's going to be an emollients clause type of lawsuit. It's a suit against the firewall that the president has set up. Just spoke with Maryland Attorney General Brian Fosh earlier today, and quoting him, he says, Trump has got a contempt for the Constitution. He will not be able to climb over or dig under the walls enacted by the Constitution to protect against presidential corruption. With that, we want to introduce our guest, law professor Francis Boyle, wonderful, brilliant legal mind, as well as a leading activist and progressive. Professor Boyle, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you, John and Mary, for having me on, and my best to your listening audience, but maybe you could turn it up a bit on your end, because now all of our phone calls go through the internet, so that creates some problems over here.
How does that, can you hear us now?
A little bit more, please.
All right. Okay, we've turned ourselves up.
Is that good, Professor Boyle?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Thank you.
I said the university, to save money, puts it now through the internet instead of regular landlines. So what can I do?
Well, you're doing your best, and so are we. So let's talk about this most recent, this breaking news, this emoluments clause lawsuit. What is the emolument clause of the Constitution, and why would the Maryland AG Brian Fosh say that Trump has got a long history of climbing over or digging underneath the walls erected by the Constitution to protect against presidential corruption?
Well, John, let me say, we have to understand first in this conversation that reasonable people can disagree about what's going on here. And it is so complicated and so difficult that I want to make it clear I do not have the Bible truth, and I'm trying to figure this out myself ever since Mr. Trump was elected. And I want to make it clear I did not vote for Mr. Trump. I'm a political independent. And indeed, immediately after Mr. Trump got elected, I went to work to get the city of Urbana reaffirmed as a sanctuary city for undocumented migrants. And that took me 5 weeks of straight work until December 19th, we won that in a 5-1 vote.
Congratulations.
And right now, Urbana is according to USA Today graphic, we are the only sanctuary city between Chicago and New Orleans. So I hope, your listeners there understand I'm not here to defend President Trump. Indeed, I work pretty hard against him. But that being said, if you follow the news media on this emoluments clause is the brainchild of law professor Richard Painter, who used to teach here. I know him quite well. And he's on all the talking shows, New York Times, etc. And his primary qualification is, they say, he was the White House legal ethics advisor to President George W. Bush. Now, they say that with a straight face. That's like saying he was a White House legal ethics advisor to Genghis Khan, covered in blood from their heads to their toes. So, with all due respect, I have never jumped onto the emoluments bandwagon. I have respect there for the Attorney General of Maryland. I guess he's looked at it differently. But why would I personally want to follow the lead of the lawyer to Genghis Khan? No, thank you. And unfortunately, what we've seen is a lot of lawyers affiliated with the Democratic Party, and I am not, I'm a political independent, have jumped onto this bandwagon started by Pater. But there's so much hypocrisy here in the sense that when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and she was openly involved in all the slush funds over there with the Clinton Foundation, none of these lawyers or law professors were talking about applying the emoluments clause to Hillary Clinton, and all of a sudden it was pulled out of a hat. So, I do wish them the best of luck. In all honesty, there was a filing today just reported in the Department of Justice, by the Department of Justice on this matter, expressing their opinion in a big brief. Again, I didn't have to read it. I've been tied up all day. But, at the end of the day, Trump did set up a trust. His legal affairs have been handled by Jamie Gorelick. She was a classmate of mine at Harvard Law School. She was Deputy Attorney General under President Clinton. And I would hope maybe that this matter has been taken care of. I don't know. But between you and me, I'm not jumping on a bandwagon being led by the legal advisor, the lawyer to Genghis Khan. But if you people want to, go right ahead.
So it seems to be that the case for impeachment is accumulating. So you have this emoluments clause lawsuit. However dubious the motivations of the plaintiffs, but we also have some very clear and indisputable case going forward, going back to Obama launching the Tomahawk missiles against Assad. Why don't we take it from that point? Make the case for impeachment with that missile launch.
Well, I think that is clear cut. And here, I did serve as lawyer counsel for the late great Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez on his bill of impeachment against President Bush Sr. Over the Persian Gulf War that the congressman put in the day the war started. And it turned out that in his memoirs, President Bush Sr. admitted that he did not go all the way to Baghdad because he feared impeachment. So, yes, these threats of impeachment, whether by Congressman Gonzalez against Bush Sr., and I was involved in that, or against Obama here, and I was involved as heavily as I could be to try to stop that attack, and pointing out an attack would be an impeachable offense, do have an impact. And certainly, just to begin here, John, on Syria, well, first of all, it's illegal for us to be there. It violates the terms of the United Nations Charter, which is an impeachable offense to begin with. These are acts of war without the express authorization by Congress as required by the War Powers the War Powers Clause of the Constitution, which was also in the Gonzalez impeachment resolution. And I did the first draft of that one. It also Trump is violating the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the United Nations Charter. This would qualify as a Nuremberg crime against peace in violation of the Nuremberg Charter judgment and principles. So certainly, if I would have no problem tomorrow with drafting an article of impeachment along those lines. And indeed, for those of you out there listening, I hereby offer my services free of charge to any member of the United States House of Representatives who wants to draft an article of impeachment against President Trump for the bombing in Syria. Just contact your member of Congress and have him or her get in touch with me, and I will certainly get to work on that one immediately. As for the emoluments clause, well, I think I'm going to leave that one to the lawyer for Genghis Khan and the Democratic apparatchiks lawyers. I'm sure they'll do a fine one on that.
Do you think that, and we'll come back to Syria in a second, but do you think that the emoluments clause lawsuit just filed by A.G. Racine and A.G. Frosch of Maryland, do you think that was politically motivated? Do you think this is partisan politics at its worst?
Yes, I do believe so, because, again, I'm a political independent. But if you look at the lawyers, at least behind other emoluments efforts against Trump, except for Painter, which is why they put him out front, they're all lawyers, longtime affiliates of the Democratic Party. So my perspective here, this is part of, as they see it, the resistance to Trump. Now, I want to make it clear, the day after Trump was elected, I went to work very hard, full-time, 5 weeks, to get Urbana reaffirmed as a sanctuary city. And I had done the original work on that back in 1986. As a matter of fact, I came out there in San Francisco as part of your original sanctuary resolution out there on adding refugees from apartheid South Africa. There was a big debate out there at Hastings Law School, and I debated some white racist professor from SMU Law School who had no problems with apartheid. So I did make my contribution out there in San Francisco there too. So I'm, but that's the way I see it, and others can see it differently.
Let's turn back the clock a little bit on Syria. On August 21st, I believe it was, 2013, it was alleged that Assad launched a sarin gas attack against its own people. U.S. spy agencies recorded every step of the alleged chemical attack, from extensive preparation to the launching of rockets to the after-action reports by Syrian officials. At that time, I was a contractor embedded in the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines. I don't want to get into that right now, except to say that that U.S. intelligence agencies recorded and intercepted every one of those phases of that attack. And in fact, there were those in the Obama administration who said that those intelligence records and reports would make the evidentiary case linking the Syria government to what one official called the indiscriminate, inconceivable horror of the use of sarin gas to kill nearly 1,500 civilians and 426 children. Witnessed that with my own eyes. Days later, Obama declared that he was ready to order a military strike on Syria. But he said that as president of the world's oldest constitutional democracy, he would have to consult Congress. Congress never did approve a military strike, in part because the American public did not want to intervene militarily in Syria. Also at that time, Donald Trump, who had not yet announced his candidacy for president, tweeted, and I quote, and I'm looking at the tweet right now, "What I am saying is stay out of Syria, President Obama. Again, to our very foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, very bad things will happen, and from that fight, the United States gets nothing." What do you think's changed in Trump's mind?
Well, let's first go back to the narrative of events. At the time, I followed it quite closely because I was working very hard to prevent an attack by President Obama. And looking through all the available evidence in the public record, it just seemed to me the case did not hold up. And I said so at the time. But later on, Seymour Martin Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, did a complete debunking of the Obama allegations that the Assad government was behind that chemical weapons attack, and he could not get it published anywhere here in the United States. So he did publish it in the London Review of Books, which I would encourage people to read. And Hersh's conclusion was that the chemical weapons there, I think it was sarin, was smuggled in from Turkey to be given to some of these jihadi terrorists, and that they were the ones behind it.
Correct, and the country of origin was North Korea.
Well, I can't recall whether it was North Korea. It might have been Libya,
Okay.
John.
Okay.
It was a while ago I read that article.
Okay.
But in any event, it was smuggled in, and this was just another pretext for war, reminiscent of the non-existent weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that led to the slaughter in Iraq, that Painter in part served as legal ethics advisor to Genghis Khan. So again, I'm not going to associate with those people. What accounts for Trump's change in positions on almost anything else you can find on these issues? It does seem to me it's just pure political opportunism. I don't know what else to say. Our politicians are all like that. I mean, let's take a look at Obama. Obama was behind me at Harvard Law School. We had the exact same jurisprudence teacher, Roberto Unger, the founder of the critical legal studies movement. And Unger has publicly stated on the BBC and elsewhere that, quote, Obama is a disaster, unquote. So I've been following Obama's careers. Indeed, he came here once to speak. I said hi, introduced myself as Harvard Law School grad, wished him the best of luck. But if you go back and you read all the speeches Obama made while running for president, they were impeccable in terms of international law and constitutional law. Remember, he's a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School, as I am. So, he knew exactly what he was doing in those speeches. And yet, once he became president, he backtracked on everything and violated every statement and principle that he had asserted in the campaign, every one of them. And then proceeded to defend and support every legal policy adopted by Genghis Khan, Bush Jr., in United States courts, all of them. He could have abandoned these positions, whatever. He backed all of them up to the hilt. And the difference, in my mind, whatever you think of Bush Jr. And Trump, Obama is a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School, and he definitely knew what he was doing and that it was illegal, unconstitutional, and criminal. Between you and me, I had a hard time figuring out what was going on in the minds of Bush Jr., and I'm still having a hard time figuring out Mr. Trump. So what can I say?
Is it the military-industrial complex, quote unquote, that drives these kinds of decisions, and not Congress?
Oh, for sure, John. I don't. Congress. What we see today, Congress just gives a rubber stamp, certainly for war, and now the U.S. police state that we see Bush Jr. constructed after 9/11 with the so-called USA Patriot Act, the FISA Amendments Act, all the rest of it, and Congress went right along with all of that gutted the Bill of Rights. Now here, when Obama became president, I had anticipated, I guess I was naive, that at a minimum he would proceed to deconstruct the Bush police state, and he didn't. And indeed, he compounded it. The National Defense Authorization Act, allowing the military here in the United States to basically kidnap anyone they want to and disappear them, and also Obama's totally execrable, reprehensible decision to murder United States citizens in clear-cut violation of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. And I'm not justifying him murdering other alleged terrorists around the world,
right.
But even President Bush Jr. Did not arrogate to himself the right to murder American citizens, as Obama and his Attorney General Eric Holder did. And Eric Holder did this at Northwestern Law School, and there with the as a prop, and there with the deliberate approval of the dean there named Rodriguez, and he got standing ovations, Holder,
right.
Before and after the speech, with everyone knowing he was coming there to justify murdering United States citizens, and they gave him a standing ovation before and afterward. And I think that just shows you the corruption,
right.
Outright corruption going on in elite American law schools today, like Northwestern, Harvard, where I went, Yale, out there at Berkeley, John Yoo, whom they gave an endowed chair to, the whole faculty. And here I have a personal stake in it that the former dean there, Frank Newman, who taught international law and human rights, was a good friend of mine, and he later was on the California Supreme Court, and now the Berkeley Law faculty has honored a war criminal and a felon and a torturer, and has John Yoo turning their own law students into war criminals, felons, and torturers. It's a disgrace, but it's going on all over elite educational institutions today. My undergraduate degree at the University of Chicago, the same thing going on over there. The fellow who teaches international human rights law, Eric Posner, publicly advocates torture. So the sickness that you find in elite legal education all over America today is pretty disgusting to me. I've been a lawyer since January 10, 1977, and a law professor here since August 21, 1978. But there it is, the nature of the beast. What can I say?
Professor Boyle, this is an interesting sidebar.
John, I'm sorry, maybe you could speak up again some more. It's the internet connection.
Certainly. This is an interesting sidebar in and of itself. You would, of course, you're talking these assassinations of the drone strikes against U.S. citizens who became jihadists. As U.S. citizens, they're entitled to due process. Obama could not order their executions, their summary executions, like the Italian mafia would. You're also talking about Obama's use of torture in Guantanamo Bay, both of which I think are impeachable offenses, as you pointed out years ago. What is interesting is I would expect the military-industrial complex to get on board with this because they're the ones who profit from what Bernie Sanders called, the never-ending war of regime changes in the Middle East. But you would not expect the, bastions of Ivy League political correctness to be on board with this as well. I'm very curious as to why you think Ivy League, bastions of political correctness would be on board. Is it simply a matter of follow the money? That there's just too much money on the warmongers just put too much money on the table in terms of endowed chairs and other funding, or is there something else going on? Are we looking at a cultural shift here in the United States?
Well, John, let me say this. I don't mean to toot my own horn here, but yeah, I went through 10 years of this so-called elite education here in America. I graduated at the top of my undergraduate class there at the University of Chicago in 3 years instead of 4. I then spent 7 years at Harvard. I magna cum laude graduate, Harvard Law School. All the Obama lawyers, the Obama law mafia, were from Harvard Law School for the most part. Mitt Romney was in my 1L class there. We took all of our first-year courses together. And then I also have an AM and PhD in political science from Harvard, specializing in international relations. I went through the same program there that produced Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski before me. I spent 2 years as an associate at Harvard Center for International Affairs. They gave me Kissinger's old office there, and then 2 years teaching in the Harvard College. So I've been through 10 years of this, and basically, in my opinion, John, what happens is that the people who really run this country, say the Rockefellers, who have given enormous amounts of money to Harvard and also founded the University of Chicago, understand that they need to get brain power to run this empire for them and make their profits. And so what they do is they go out at these elite institutions, certainly University of Chicago and Harvard, where I spent 10 years, and they recruit the brightest young people that they can get. And they don't care all that much about color or religion or anything like that. It's brain power. And then they bring them into these elite institutions, and they effectively brainwash them into becoming part of the elite, that to think that they are now part of the elite. And these people like me or like others, my father was a lawyer, so okay, that was sort of professional middle class. But they offer these people who, bright young and even idealistic young people, they offer them money and fame and power, and they brainwash them to go along with the system. And that's why, you end up with someone like Obama. What can I say? I really don't know what I'll say. But it's a very effective system, right, John, of brainwashing bright, young, idealistic kids, basically from middle class, maybe upper middle class, in sociological economic terms, even lower class, into this elite, where they get I guess you would say, drops off the master's table to run the empire.
Right.
And that is the way the system works, at least as I saw it for 10 years on the inside and now 40 years on the outside opposing it.
If you were to say that on a street corner, people would say, oh, there goes another conspiracy theorist nut. But in truth, Professor Boyle, you have a lot of documentary evidence to make your case. And as the first exhibit, I offer up President Eisenhower's last speech at the White House, in which he warned against the military-industrial complex. I've researched that speech at the National Archives, and the original wording of that speech refers to the military-industrial congressional university complex. And the last two elements, congressional and university, were struck out. And Eisenhower only referred to the military-industrial complex. But he initially wanted to refer to the complicity of all four elements working together: military, industrial, congressional, university. At the time that President Dwight Eisenhower was president of the United States, his brother, Milton Eisenhower, was president of the Johns Hopkins University, my alma mater. I'm a graduate of the Site School, and I was one of Brzezinski's students, by the way. And at that time, the Applied Physics Lab of Johns Hopkins was founded, and over time it became the #1 military contractor in the United States. The #1 military contractor. Milton Eisenhower, president of Johns Hopkins and the Applied Physics Lab. His brother, president of the United States. There was a clear link to universities in this this military-industrial congressional complex. No doubt about that. Do you want to comment on that?
Everything you're saying is perfectly correct, not only on the basis of my experience of 10 years at the University of Chicago and Harvard, two of the most elite educational institutions in this country, if not the world. But if you don't want to take my word for it, Noam Chomsky has edited a book called The Cold War and the University. And he went out and recruited some top scholars in the country, professors, and they go through department by department, Russian research studies centers, international affairs centers, psychology departments, anthropology departments, and prove how after World War II, they were funded, set up, directed, controlled by the Pentagon and or the CIA. Yes, there is ample documentation, even in the public record, for what you are saying. But again, if your readers, your listeners that are interested, Chomsky has a book, Cold War and the University, and he goes right through all of them. For example, cites well-known neocon haven in the academic world, no question about that. Right. And I could go through a lot of them if you want, but we'd be here forever. But the bottom line is, John, that so much of elite, like CITES is an elite school, as you know. Right. So much of elite education here in America has been bought off and corrupted by the military-industrial complex, CIA, Department of Defense, now right. Department of Homeland Security, and is basically producing new Cold Warriors to carry out their agenda, whether they're lawyers or international relations experts or economists or something like that.
Do you want to talk about the militarization of our intelligence agencies at all?
Well, haven't they always been sort of working hand in glove with the Pentagon? I mean, the NSA is part of the Pentagon, and as Snowden has pointed out, if there had been any doubt about it, they're intercepting all of our communications, whether by email or Snapchat or phone. They're intercepting my communication with you here today. In fact, in 2006, two agents of the FBI and the CIA showed up here at my office in a College of Law building, misrepresented who they are to my secretary, so I let them in. They identified themselves and then proceeded to interrogate me for 1 hour and tried to get me to become an informant on my Arab and Muslim clients, which I refused to do. So they put me on all the U.S. government's terrorist watch lists. According to my lawyer, I'm on all of them. Right. But the first question they asked me, the CIA, FBI, is why are you giving all these interviews all over the world? That's what they were primarily concerned with. And then, of course, they wanted me to become an informant on my Arab and Muslim clients, which clearly would have violated their constitutional rights and my ethical obligations as a lawyer. Now, in response to the first question, I have no problem answering. I don't do anything illegal here. Of course, I would, any of your listeners, if the FBI ever shows up to interrogate you, don't talk to them without a lawyer.
Right.
It's that simple.
And don't let them into your house.
Too dangerous.
And don't let them into your house.
Pardon me?
And don't let them into your house or office.
Right. No, unless there's a warrant. But in any event, on the first question they asked me, I just said, honestly, well, I went through the same PhD program at Harvard that produced Henry Kissinger before me. Mm-hmm. The Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences Department of Government. And that sort of answered their question. But the bottom line is they were very concerned about my First Amendment rights and why was I saying what I was saying. And clearly they had been monitoring it, and they're still monitoring it today. As far as I can tell, all my communications are intercepted.
No, and
but this just goes back to the NSA, that we know the NSA is part of the government. Mm-hmm. They have this new center they're building out there in Utah. They've got files on all of us, right. And if they don't like something we're doing, they're going to blackmail us. I'm confident large numbers of Congress, the federal judiciary, everyone in the federal judiciary has to undergo an FBI background check, and they probably come up with all sorts of dirt on these people that they hold in reserve for purposes of blackmail.
Right.
So, we know J. Edgar Hoover had a file on everyone and blackmailed everyone, and I don't think anything's changed at the FBI. Certainly putting me on all the government's terrorist watch list indicates to me that nothing has changed. Indeed, if you are interested, there's an excellent book, FBI Secrets, by a retired and decorated FBI agent, Wesley Swearingen,
right.
Where he repeatedly calls the FBI, quote, an American Gestapo, unquote. Correct. And I think that's true. So, you're reading these debates here about Comey and Mueller. These are former Gestapo heads between right. you and me. There are no good guys here in this debate on either side, John. Comey, in addition to heading up the FBI and all the terrible things the FBI does to everyone, including reinstituting COINTELPRO and applying it to Muslims and Arabs, Comey was up to his eyeballs in all the violations of international law, human rights, and the United States Constitution inflicted by President Bush Jr. when he was deputy to Ashcroft. Ashcroft was from the University of Chicago Law School, so I'm familiar with his career. And I documented all that, all these Bush atrocities in my book, Tackling America's Toughest Questions, that start with the beginning of Bush stealing the presidency from the American people at the U.S. Supreme Court, and ending with Obama coming to power, where I predicted that we very well might be getting a third Bush term. So there it is. As for Mueller, he's former FBI director. He came in right after or just before 9/11. Again, he was responsible for every hideous atrocity Bush Jr. Inflicted on Arabs and Muslims and everything else. Before that, Mueller was Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division in the Department of Justice. He supervised the implication of Libya and Gaddafi, the cover-up, the misdirection over the Lockerbie bomb.
Right.
Up until then, we had all been told that it was Iran, basically retaliation for Reagan, the Vincennes shooting down the Iran Airbus. I don't know if it was or it wasn't, but in any event, Bush Sr. needed Iran and Syria for his war against Saddam Hussein to steal all the Gulf oil, and so he cut a deal, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they blamed Libya on this, and it was Mueller who was in charge of fixing all the evidence against Libya and diverting attention from Iran and Syria. I document that in my book, Destroying Libya and World Order. So notice you have all these dead Americans, and it's Mueller who's covering it up. Likewise, Mueller, this so-called special counselor we're dealing with now, he was, as director of the FBI, he was in charge of covering up the U.S. government origins of the anthrax attacks of October 2001. I discuss this in my book, Biowarfare and Terrorism. I drafted the Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989 that was adopted unanimously by both houses of Congress and signed into law by President Bush Sr. It's the U.S. domestic implementing legislation for the Biological Weapons Convention. So I've been following biological weapons forever. And as soon as the technology for that anthrax was published in the New York Times, I knew that this was super weapons grade anthrax that could only be produced by a United States government weapons laboratory.
Right.
And I immediately called up the head of the FBI counterterrorism office at that time, Marion Spike Bowman. I had run into at a conference at Michigan Law School dealing with terrorism and things, and they had a panel on biological weapons. And he knew of my expertise in this area. And I told Bowman that this could only come out of a U.S. government biological warfare laboratory, and you immediately had to go after these labs.
Right.
And then I put the phone down, and I realized I had a list of all those labs. So I called them back up, and I went through the list of all U.S. government labs dealing with anthrax. And then I said, and by the way, also Broad and Miller, the New York Times, have written the expose in their book Germs, that the CIA is doing anthrax work as well. So what you need to do is to go after these labs. I'm sure you'll find your scientists somewhere in there, and then talk to the CIA. So I still remember Bowman saying to me, well, we're working with Fort Detrick on this. And I said, you're working with Fort Detrick? I said, look here, Fort Detrick is probably the source of the problem.
Right.
That someone, that they're probably it.
And an innocent man was framed who ended up committing suicide.
Bruce Ivins was completely innocent.
Correct.
And there has been evidence to believe that he was off. But that's another issue.
I mean,
in any event,
he died of overdose deaths of Tylenol. Give me a break.
Right.
It might show you.
How do you die of an overdose of Tylenol? I mean, really. But in any event, the bottom line was I had assumed that given what had happened here with the anthrax attacks, and I believe that whoever was behind 9/11 probably coordinated these anthrax attacks. And if the anthrax attacks were the deep state here, which I think they were, then that sort of leads to the question who was behind 9/11. But in any event, I had assumed, this was very early on, John, I had assumed that the FBI was going after these people because they had shut down the United States Congress. As you know, Congress went out of session.
Right.
This was, I would say, a mortal sin against our republic, that Congress, the House of the people, actually goes out of session, but it did. And then what happened was it was pointed out that the FBI went out to Ames, Iowa, where the United States government keeps all of its anthrax samples, including the sample involved here, and destroyed all of them. So at that point, it was very clear to me there was a cover-up going on. The FBI was behind it, and Mueller was the head of the FBI at that time.
Right, and
this is the special counsel investigating Trump that we are dealing with. He is not a hero. This man is a long-time legal hatchet man and operative for what we call the deep state, the CIA, the Pentagon, whatever. This is going to be completely political. What is going on here? It's all politicized on both sides, John. In my opinion, you're entitled to your own opinion. There are no good guys here, whether in the Trump administration, Congress, the FBI, Mueller, any of these people, and the mainstream news media are all mongering for war against Russia, which is extremely dangerous. So far, I have seen no evidence, no facts that Russia was involved or penetrated our elections or something like that. I'm keeping an open mind on it. But this is all warmongering against Russia. It's extremely dangerous because whenever we've seen this much of warmongering against a foreign state before, certainly in my lifetime, it's led to war. So where is all this going? And it's only just gotten started, John. It's in my opinion, I'm afraid it's only going to get worse.
You know, we had Colleen Rowley as a guest in our last show, 2003 Time Magazine Person of the Year, FBI.
I know Colleen.
Yes, FBI agent and division counsel who now teaches whistleblower ethics at the FBI Academy at Quantico as part of her settlement with the FBI. She made exactly the same points you are about the abuses of the FBI, about the dubious character of Robert Mueller. It might interest you to know.
Let me continue one point on this. That Colleen was involved, I believe, up in Minnesota, the FBI office up there with Moussawi's computer, right? And they tried to get a FISA warrant to inspect Moussawi's computer in good faith, which very well could have unraveled and prevented 9/11. It was Marion Spike Bowman, the same guy I was dealing with on the anthrax cover-up, who killed Rowley's request for the FISA warrant. And they could have easily gotten that FISA warrant. I mean, they're saying, oh, well, they would have never gotten a FISA warrant. Well, that's a joke. That FISA court is a kangaroo court with a rubber stamp. You know, if the FBI headquarters had presented what Colleen and her colleagues had turned up, of course they would have gotten a FISA warrant the next 10 seconds later, and perhaps 9/11 could have been avoided.
Yeah,
but go ahead with your point, John.
So it might interest you to know, and we only have 10 minutes. I want to come back to Trump and the Syrian airstrikes, but it might cheer you to know that I did a lot of investigation and research into the lead investigator on the anthrax attacks. He was an FBI agent and attorney by the name of Vincent B. Lisi, Lisi, one of the most corrupt federal law enforcement officials I've ever met in my life. Framed an innocent man who later, I believe, was offed by the feds, by the deep state, who invented this whole myth about Fort Detrick, about the source of the anthrax, participated in writing, I believe, the Homeland Security Act and the U.S. Patriot Act, even before the anthrax attacks and 9/11. These were in draft forms.
It's a matter of public record.
It is.
That the USA Patriot Act had already been drafted.
Correct.
By Viet Din and was ready to go. He did this for Ashcroft, who, as you know, was flying around in private jets before 9/11 because someone told him to avoid public aircraft. That USA Patriot Act was on the shelf and ready to go.
Absolutely.
Before 9/11. And as for the this FBI and the anthrax, you know, John, I follow these matters professionally. Right now, we have at least 29 dead microbiologists, including Bruce Ivins, I believe, last time I looked. And as far as I can tell, these people came across in their work the fact that their labs were involved in illegal, criminal, covert biowarfare activities. They reported it to their superiors, or they threatened to go public, and I personally believe they're all offed one way or the other.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
It's a very dangerous situation out there.
So let me finish the Vincent B. Lisi story. So I hounded him out of the headquarters office of the FBI. I won't tell you how or when. I won't give you the details, except to say he filed a protective order against me. He ended up. This is how they take care of their own. He was promoted to be the special agent in charge of the Boston office, and guess when? At the time of the Boston Marathon bombings, he was the one who invoked martial law powers in looking for the two alleged bombers. First time on American soil that an FBI special agent in charge invoked martial law powers. Again, I raised Cain about that. Hounded him out of that job. Where does he end up? He is now the security director of General Dynamics, one of our nation's leading military contractors. They do all the nuclear subs, all the nuclear ordnance on all the nuclear subs. So in this world, in this alternative universe, if you're one of the bad guys, you're never pushed out. You're never demoted. You're only promoted, and you're either promoted vertically or laterally. This Vincent Lisi is now making 5 times the amount of money at General Dynamics. I filed a request of information about his salary because General Dynamics is a federal contractor. He makes 5 times the salary. That's a base salary exclusive of stock options at General Dynamics than he made as an FBI special agent in charge of the Boston office. You get rewarded for being a black hat in this world.
That is correct, and it also, I followed it with the careers of all these lawyers involved in the skullduggery going back to 9/11, 2001, and I won't go through all that here, but it even happens in the academic world where you had John Yoo out there at Berkeley being given an endowed chair when the entire Berkeley law faculty knew full well he was up to his eyeballs in torture and felony. And that's exactly the type of guy they wanted. Right. Likewise, at Harvard Law School, they were going to hire Jack Goldsmith, who worked for Ashcroft and took John Yoo's place. And he, too, was up to his eyeballs in torture, war crimes, crimes against humanity, violating the Constitution. And I had all this evidence presented to the Harvard Law School faculty, and they hired him anyway, because that's exactly the type of guy they wanted on the faculty. And to top it off, the dean of the Harvard Law School at that time, who fully supported Goldsmith, was Elena Kagan, who's now on the United States Supreme Court. And she's in cahoots with all the neocons, and she's the justice from Goldman Sachs. She was, as dean of Harvard Law School, she was getting $10,000 a meeting to go to the Goldman Sachs board of directors meetings. So it just shows you, John, how corrupt the entire system has become from top to bottom, certainly since 9/11. I mean, I guess, I don't know how old you are. I'm 67. I guess I could go back quite some time. But after 9/11, it's become super corrupt.
So let's wind up the show. We've got exactly 5 minutes, Professor Francis Boyle, and we'll introduce you at the end of the show. I don't want to waste a precious minute here doing that. I spoke with 3 members of Congress leading up to this show about Trump's tomahawk strike on Syria. Senator Mike Lee, a Utah Republican. These are Republicans now. Right. And speaking about that tomahawk strike, and I quote, this is a direct quote from him. If the United States is to increase our military force in Syria, John, we should follow the Constitution and seek the proper authorization from Congress. Trump should make the case in front of the American people and allow their elected representatives to debate the benefits and the risks of further Middle East intervention to our national security interests. Senator Rand Paul, a Kentucky Republican.
I admire Senator Paul, by the way, on international issues. I think he's tried to adhere to a constitutional
absolutely. He's one of my heroes, and we're going to get him on the show soon, as well as his father. I'm hoping for a father-son team, by the way. So Senator Paul told me this: the president needs congressional authorization for military action anywhere, as required by the Constitution. And I call upon him on behalf of my state to come to Congress for a proper debate. Our prior intervention in this region have done nothing to make the United States safer, and Syria will be no different. And then finally I spoke to Senator Foreign Relations Committee Chair Bob Corker, who said that President Trump should, quote, certainly come to Congress before acting in Syria. So in winding up the show, Professor Francis Boyle, if Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the United States Constitution means anything, it means that the president must obtain congressional approval before taking us to war against a sovereign state. So why haven't articles of impeachment been filed?
They should be. And as I said, I'm happy to work with any member of the House to draft an article of impeachment, certainly on this issue. And put it in right away. I think we need to do that. I think we need to send a shot across the bow here against Trump, just as Gonzalez and I did against Bush Sr. I was saying for Obama to have attacked Syria was also impeachable. We have to do this to dissuade Trump from continuing down the path of military escalation in Syria. We're now seeing him directly attacking Syrian military forces. He's directly arming the Kurds up there in the north to carve out part of Kurdistan. We have special forces over there. The lives of the young women, men and women of our armed forces are at risk here. Without any authorization by Congress as required by the Constitution, and it is extremely dangerous. As we started out in the original press release, it seems very clear to me that all the regional powers now have moved into Syria to carve it up and to grab their own zones, as they've done to Iraq. And right now, we're trying to work out this so-called deconfliction rules with Russia, which are basically our own zones of occupation. But anything can go wrong. If you look at the reports coming out of there could easily be a mistake where we kill Russians or they kill us. And under the current circumstances in this current environment, with anti-Russian warmongering. Imagine one of these Russian jet fighter planes drops a bomb on one of our troops there in Syria along the border with Jordan, or up with the Kurds, or going after Raqqa. I could not predict the public outroar and uproar if something like that were to happen. So this is extremely dangerous and provocative. What Trump is doing there, but we have to say it was started by Obama for sure, and I think we need to stop it. We need to rein them in, and I certainly think a bill of impeachment against Trump for this